Sri Lanka's need for preparedness. Roshan Madawela's interview with Daily Mirror.
Hello and welcome to Daily Mirror Insights, your go-to space for conversations that matter. I'm Molly Nuanes, and today we are coming to you from Daily Mirror. We are honored to be joined by one of the Sri Lanka's most prominent voices in international relations and strategic affairs, and one of the economics, Roshan Madawela, the founding director and the CEO of the Research Intelligence Unit.
And I'm Mario Padar, and we're the social media liaisons of Daily Mirror. And today, we'll be diving into key global and regional issues, exploring insights, perspectives, and the realities shaping our world right now. Stay with us as we unpack it all.
So, yes, sir. The first question is going to be, Sri Lanka has just rebuilt its economy after 22 crisis, and yet all oil prices have surged rapidly. What does oil at USD 100 to 120 per barrel mean for the rupee, inflation, and the daily cost of living? And as the following, at what point does this escalation into a second economic crisis?
Thank you. Thank you, Nali and Malit. Thank you for having me, and thank you for listening to everyone out there. Have a quick rewind of what happened in Sri Lanka. As you said, we became victims of a series of internal and then external shocks, right? As an island country that is a developing country, essentially trying to achieve and establish a mid-income position in the world. So as a quick recap, we had a terror attack. Then we had a external shock in the form of a pandemic, which affected the whole world, and I think recoiled the world economy by 2 or 3% in 2021, 2020. Sri Lanka was massively affected, and that actually got the wheels moving in terms of how we lost revenue, which was essential to our balance of payments position and the foreign exchange reserves position. So this triggered the economic crisis, and Sri Lanka got a taste of what it's like to have an energy crisis and galloping inflation. On the upside, Sri Lanka is one of the only nations in the world to have successfully toppled a political regime that was hugely unpopular and widely regarded as corrupt and unrepresentative, with, I would say, minimum bloodshed compared to those that followed around the world, including in Bangladesh and other places around the world. So Sri Lanka's Aragala, which means struggle, Sri Lanka's struggle for political representation is regarded as the most successful. So there is something positive in this. And since we've come out of it, we've had elections. We now have a government which can be said to be truly representative of its people. And we are on the path to recovery. And now look what happens, right? So we're really living in the age of volatility, uncertainty, and a lot of chaos. So to answer your question specifically, we've been speaking to people in the industry, in the oil industry, and we can look at this in two ways: supply and price. So oil supply, let's talk about the fortunate part first. What we are assured is that our supply of oil will not be interrupted. So fortunately, we're not looking at the position that this country was in a few years ago when people had to, pull their bicycles out. There were queues, there were people keeping oil in bottles at home, and petrol and diesel and all of these things. So we are assured by the industry here that supply is secure. We also have 3 Fortune 500 companies who are giving petrol and diesel to the people of this country, right?
Could you explain the 3 Fortune 500 companies?
So we have Shell, we have Sinopec, and we have the Indian Oil Company. And on top of that, we have the state-owned CPC as well, right? So as a economy, it appears that our security of supply is assured. And every day you hear about, China giving a tanker to Sri Lanka, India, and other friendly countries from the region. So this is a good point. The problem really is that oil price is determined internationally here, right? So everything, the whole world has to prepare itself for inflation. That is clear. So over the last 4 to 5 weeks, we've seen that inflation the price of oil has pretty much doubled, right? We've had these minor swings up and down largely based on the markets watching what happens in the West Asia region, as well as tweets from the occupant of the White House. These things have caused some fluctuation, but on the whole, we're looking at a huge escalation in price. Some have compared it to the 1970s oil shock. I think very early for many of listeners and yourselves, you would recall that when there was a conflict between Egypt and Israel and the Suez Canal was blocked, we had a similar situation there. So inflation, cost of production is going to go high. It's going to affect many of our sectors, and also agriculture, because something that's less talked about is the fact that agriculture and petroleum are connected in terms of the fertilizer use. So price of fertilizer being affected is also going to be bad news for our growers in Sri Lanka, the plantation sector, the smaller growers. So the clearest thing that we are facing now with specific respect to the price of oil is inflation. There are other dimensions to how this conflict is going to impact our economy here, which I'm sure that we will get into, right?
So like you said, because of inflation and all, like oil prices and gas prices have gone up, right? So let's say the war was going today. How long do you think that the amount that was inflated will come down? Because oil prices have gone up really high. Like, it's up to the price that related to oil prices during Gotabaya Rajapaksa's era. So how long do you think, if the war ended today, it will take for that person to go down?
So Malit, as economists, as journalists, as market analysts, we can use what we've learned to try to predict the oil prices. But unfortunately, geopolitical events override how we can look at markets. So for us to forecast the oil price internally would be like planning a picnic in a storm, right? And you rightly mentioned that in 2022, I think, was a peak. And that again was due to geopolitical situation, right? Because when the Ukraine-Russia conflict ignited as a military conflict, it's always been there simmering. When this conflict ignited as a military conflict, we saw the price of oil jump. And that's what we're seeing again here. So to answer your question, we really need to delve into the dynamics of what's happening in the West Asia conflict now. Now, yesterday morning, the world woke up and was very happy, I think, for the most part, 99%, I would imagine, and euphoric that we have reached a peace agreement, right? Which means, everyone woke up in the morning thinking, okay, we're going to have less people dying, less civilian infrastructure bombed, less people going on one meal a day across the global south and the developing world. And you know, it was good, but unfortunately, we have an unpredictable player in this. That is the apartheid Zionist state of Israel. And before the day ended, they proved yet again, they do not want peace. They do not want the war to stop. And the prime minister there in Israel needs continuous war and conflict to take place, probably for his personal survival, right?
Yeah, they had like bombed Tehran, 100 missiles within span of 10 minutes. Lebanon.
Exactly, and they have launched according to some sources, 100 missiles in 1 hour after the ceasefire was announced into Lebanon, and killed 1,000 people. 1,000 people in the mall shopping, or in one case, a funeral. They bombed the entire graveyard, killing, the people who were at a funeral. So we're dealing with an extremely criminal and rogue regime. Even some countries in the West are calling out Israel as a threat to global peace. And, many of us are aware that Israel controls the White House to a large extent, right? And we can draw a reference with Epstein files and AIPAC and the amount of money that's funded to congressmen and senators and so forth. So America has a great friend And with a friend like that, America doesn't need any enemies, honestly, because this war is seriously damaging America's status as a superpower in the world. It's gone. Had they not been persuaded to enter a war that is against their interest by Israel, they could have maintained their status in the world for maybe decades, right?
Yeah.
They continue to foster goodwill, soft power, etc. Unfortunately, what's happened here is that the superpower, the hegemony that it had, has been the erosion of that has been put on fast forward. It's been put on steroids by what has happened. We've seen
Sorry, Dr. But like you said, like Trump's rating has gone down since the war started, right? And like, do you think what kind of superpower would come, like from the country there is China, there's Russia, from this India as well coming up and on? From which country do you think will take the hits? Because after this war started, Trump's rating has gone down, and as a whole world, we have condemned the actions of USA.
Yeah, before I answer that, Molly, let me just say that though, unfortunately, the current political system in the US, whether it's Trump or Democrats, unfortunately, we've seen that they've supported a genocide over the last few years. We've had to watch as human beings on screen, the obliteration of children and babies in hospitals and schools, and they're normalizing this because they did that yesterday as well. And America is the enabler of this. They have been. So I think the cleavage between the American people on the one side and the government on the other has been polarized, right? So until there's a proper change, political change, until America has a Arugula moment, I mean, there's so many great voices in America who are silenced, who are, cancelled, and so forth. Until they have the say, and they're the people who will put America first. America will remain, some people have described it as the tail wagging the dog. There'll be in a situation of compromise, of not being able to act in their own interest. And this is why the world is dangerous at the moment, because we have a small, tiny state in the Middle East who have a lot of leverage on the declining superpower, declining economically, but not militarily. So America still has the largest military in the world and so forth. And this seems to be at the behest of the Israeli regime. So that's not a good situation. So makes our job also difficult to predict. I personally always would like to, advocate for peace, a just peace. I just don't see where it's going to come from at the moment, because Israel is run by a leader who wants continual conflict and war, and seems to have a society that is okay with genocide and all of it. So it's a big problem. So who is emerging out of this in the world, right? Who is emerging here? And so I think we all know Russia has gained from this conflict in terms of its oil revenue has doubled. Apparently, I hear that what was in the Russian budget for this year from oil revenue was actually half of what they have started to get. So a winner is Russia. Russia has also been unsanctioned by many countries, both in the economically developed world as well as the developing world, because Russian oil is now needed as a matter of necessity. And Europe, who formerly boycotted Russian energy, is now having to go back to Russia and say, that they need oil. Otherwise, Europe is going to have a very difficult winter. And other countries like India, who, for whatever reason, were taking their orders from the White House and not acting in national interest at all times. And imagine a country the size of India having to ask permission from America if they're okay to buy Russian oil. Is ridiculous. But having done that, I think they've had to go back to Russia and say, hey guys, we need your oil, right? So Russia, sure. China is China is the future global superpower. I think economically China is already the global superpower, right? And many commentators say all this messing around with Venezuela and West Asia by America underpins a longer term strategy to undermine energy supply to China. I think you're aware that Venezuela and China were cooperating in energy, and of course China is close to Iran and the Middle East for oil. So it may hold some water, that theory, because China does get affected. But hey, for China to get over this is a minor, blip in their whole plan. China's overall position as the economic superpower in the world is not going to change by this, even though it will have some effect. So there's no winner here. What we have seen in the last month is possibly the emergence of Iran as a fourth power in the world, certainly militarily and potentially economically as well.
So just a question. So since you mentioned the Hormuz earlier, the Strait of Hormuz is critically disrupted, right? In the middle, in the affecting global shipping routes. So what is going to happen in the domestic era? What is the practical impact of Sri Lanka's imports in the ports and the trade, the cost? And also, does this situation pose in Sri Lanka's international security?
Good question. The philosophical view on this is, to start with, right, before we get into the economic impact, is that now we have seen America doesn't care about anyone else apart from his one friend, Israel. Because we saw America pull out all the air defense systems from Korea, from Taiwan, from the UAE, from all over West Asia, and stuck it all in Israel to protect Israel. So all these, puppet governments who were formerly with America, and they're literal puppets and slaves, but, they were paying money for protection, right, to America, but proved futile. So Sri Lanka, as an emerging country in the global south, should learn its first lesson that we're dealing with a country that doesn't really care about people, other than this one special country for them, right? The second point, which is shocking from the perspective of, civilization, the world, it has civilizations that go back thousands of years. 2 times in the last 1 year, America has attacked Iran during negotiations. I mean, do we know what that means? It's like in ancient times, it would be regarded as something despicable, and it should be regarded the same way today. It's like shooting someone in the back. To go back to the American values that were there in, say, Hollywood some years ago, you would never shoot a man in the back. You would never shoot someone during negotiations, nor let alone bomb schools or hospitals, right? So this value system that America had, and then many of our parents' generations looked up to, rightly perhaps, seems to have eroded, and we're seeing a power structure which has very serious moral issues. And again, I'm not talking about American people. I'm talking about the leadership, because of the compromised nature of it. Yeah, Sri Lanka should understand and act in its own self-interest and take a non-aligned position, but that should not mean that we dilute our moral compass on issues. That doesn't mean we stay silent when there's a genocide, or when schools are being bombed, or people are breaching ceasefires, right? Sri Lanka should voice itself, because, look, what have we seen in the last? We've seen a country that's been sanctioned for 47 years stand up to global superpowers and say, no, this is wrong. We believe in our independence, we value it, and we will fight for it. The global south and all of the countries that, used to be like in a slave-master relationship can now rethink. They should take an example. So coming back to Sri Lanka, yes, we should relook at our economic cooperation. I know that the US accounts for like 20% of our government exports, 25%. Yeah. What I expect will happen is a political pivot, political and diplomatic pivot towards the emerging world. Yeah, looking at the other superpowers, the other regional powers, because Sri Lanka needs to re-cement relationships with people like China, who Sri Lanka has had relations with for thousands of years, right? Great diplomatic and economic relations with India and China for thousands of years. Trust and shared values. So economic shift or reorientation of our export markets will follow. Take India, for example. There are some 200 million Indians who have the same spending power as Western Europe. In China, this number is much bigger. China is a country that removed all its people literally out of poverty into that middle income space over the last 20 years. They've had a war on inequality, right? They've had a war on pollution while America's waging war around the world. China has addressed this, and now they're addressing corruption in the military and so forth. So Sri Lanka should position diplomatically, economically, militarily, in every sense towards countries, friendly, brotherly countries in the region. Also, bear in mind that if oil is going to be a big problem, then future transport, etc., will be challenging. So trade groupings, regional trade groupings, may be something that we're looking at. And this is something which is happening not only in Sri Lanka and Asia, but all over the world. You see countries like Canada doing deals with Northern European countries, with Japan, with China. It's all a bit of a mashup at the moment.
And also,
dealing with to get its oil through the Strait of Hormuz, right?
Yeah.
France bypassed the US and done a straight deal with Iran and said, we're going to do our own thing, and they've got their tankers out. India's doing the same, Japan, Pakistan. So it's all up in the air at the moment. But I'm thinking how it's going to fall down will have an element of reorientation and regional cooperation as well.
And also, when it comes to Sri Lanka's tea exports, most of the tea exports go to the Middle East, right? So
Absolutely.
How vulnerable is the plantation is going to be its sector when it comes to distributions in trade and the payments? And also, can
Yes.
Sri Lanka technically and realistically diversity alternative markets in the short term, at least in the short term period?
Okay, so tea, as you said, let's start with tea.
Yes, because that's like the most export thing that we have in Sri Lanka.
Yeah, I mean, we have shipped 125 million kilograms to the Middle East, worth an estimated $750 million last year to the Middle East. This represents like half of our exports around the world. I think in the short term, exporters are feeling it. They will probably feel it in the short term, but moving forward, I expect alternative routes will be established. The cost of exporting and the cost of a cup of tea in Oman might be much higher than it was, say, previously. But I don't think those exports will be long-term impacted in a long-term sense. And also, products that are of high quality will always find global markets, right? What I feel is more worrying, Anali, is the potential impact from remittances from the Middle East, right? Because we have an economy that is dependent on a lot of remittances coming in from UAE, from Kuwait, from Saudi Arabia. And so I've got some data here. So it's almost $200 million last year from UAE. Similar amount from Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, about $150 million. So all of this has been propping up Sri Lanka's economy, right? In my personal view, as a long-term strategy, I like the idea of exporting people, right? So they should be here or working or doing not manual jobs. So as a long-term strategy, it's good. It's a challenge. Let's look at how Sri Lanka can employ these people, increase their productivity, and make them an engine of growth for Sri Lanka, right? In the short term, I believe the government is already planning to see how these people can be repatriated and to support them to come back. If this war continues, it is widely believed that the economies of the UAE and Saudi and Kuwait and all of these governments that were very closely aligned to the USA and indirectly or maybe directly to Israel as well, will be severely damaged. On the plus side, if you're an economist, and I personally find it difficult to take any plus point from a war and a disaster, but there are two plus points from an economics point of view. One is in logistics, which you touched on. If you remember 2 years ago when the Ansarullah in Yemen, when they blocked that route, Colombo port experienced a 30% increase in its activity and revenue. And it's happening again. So Sri Lanka being blessed with its location, no one can mess it up. This particular benefit, it will kick in. The longer the conflict continues, the longer that increase in volumes will be felt on the ports, shipping, and logistics sectors.
Yeah. So,
sorry, the second one, if I could quickly, I think is something that we are also trying to address. is in real estate. According to Savills, a journal from Savills very recently noted that there is $1 trillion of investment earmarked for real estate in 2026 globally. Institutional real estate investment, globally earmarked. And in the previous year, they said the emerging market real estate sector was getting an increasing share of global real estate. And much of this was destined, much of the 1 trillion was destined to Dubai and other cities in West Asia. Again, I don't like to see how, we benefit from this, but there will be an impact. This investment will want to park in other places, and Sri Lanka is, I would argue, one of the best real estate destinations in the world. And if we are smart enough to position ourselves to facilitate this FDI, then the real estate sector also stands to gain.
Yeah, so but when you say real estate, whole city, although it started off doing from foreign reserves in the country, right now they're focused on real estate in terms of the both starting. Do you think as an economist, it's better to use it as a real estate venture, or do you think it's better to go on other ventures as well in terms of to get foreign research?
You mean the FDI coming into Sri Lanka, will it go to real estate, but as well as other sectors?
Yes.
I hope it does, because I also agree that Sri Lanka needs to industrialize because it reduces the vulnerability of the economy. We with the IMF can come and tell us, guys, you just need to focus on tourism and everything will be all right. Sorry, that doesn't seem to work. So if I refer to work from Professor Howard and Bram Nicholas, they have been advocating for Sri Lanka to industrialize aggressively, because that's the only way that it's been proven a country can emerge from developing to middle to developed. So maybe it's an opportunity as we get back people who've been trained and who are very productive in the Middle East to come back. We can set up industries. In the 90s and the early 2000s, Sri Lanka had a very successful industrialization drive. Free trade zones came up all over the country. Hatunayaka, Pallekale, Sitawaka, and so on. So with that, employment, exports, and this cushions the country to external shocks. As I said earlier, I believe this is an era of external shocks. We have already entered into this. Conflicts are increasing, and if some of this investment goes into industrialization, that's great. Real estate is a low-hanging fruit. It's not the answer or the cure to Sri Lanka's economic challenges, but it can be a major driver of GDP growth. And here I'm going to plug in that we have an event on the 5th of May at the port city where we're getting policymakers and developers in the private sector to come and brainstorm how we as an island can attract an increasing share of this GDP, so FDI, into this country. Just 1% of $1 trillion is like 3 World Trade Centers, right, of FDI. I think we should be looking at a much bigger share. And I believe that Sri Lanka will achieve that.
Yes, so before we go to the last question that we're going to ask you, so in terms of economy, Sri Lankan economy, Sri Lanka remains under IMF support recovery program since 2022 or 23, I'm not really sure. So could this crisis undermine our foreign reserves and jeopardize that recovery? Because right now we're a crucial stage where a few weeks ago, the fifth and sixth reform took place in Sri Lanka. So how does crisis affect that, our recovery, in terms of the IMF support program?
Okay, good question. I think the first point here is that the IMF doesn't support developing countries long-term to become advanced countries on the whole. There are maybe a few exceptions. You might laugh, but do you know how many times Sri Lanka has had to go to the IMF? 17 times in the last so many decades. So the IMF gives you a recipe to come back to them, boom and bust cycles. The IMF doesn't give you recipes to build sustainable economies. IMF gives you recipes to remain a dependent global south economy, unindustrialized, and supporting the existing power order, economic global power order, which now is not there anymore, it's crumbling. So the second point is so many countries have had a change over the last few years, right? What I believe Sri Lanka needs to do, and there are other commentators like from the IPE who suggest that Sri Lanka can group together with other countries in the world and have a voice to demand from the IMF restructuring of debt. From a philosophical point of view, Sri Lanka has been asked to pay for debt from government officials who private sector has lent to, just to give you a context. And the people are being asked to pay. If your local bank, if you go to your bank and you ask them for a loan, they'll do a lot of due diligence, right? And if you don't pay, they take the hit. They can take you to court and stuff. So here, fundamentally, you have institutional private sector lenders, ISBs, international sovereign bonds, lending to developing countries. They can lend to a nutcase, they can lend to a despotic leader, they can lend to a corrupt leader, and they are assured that they're going to get the money back. That is fundamentally wrong, right? So the burden of repayment should be shared in a more equitable way. And with so many countries in the global south demanding restructuring of their debt as well, because they're getting hit by all these shocks, not least the price of oil. So here is an opportunity for Sri Lanka to renegotiate. I know we got 7 to 8 billion in reserves, but that's going to start dwindling when the country goes back to repaying its debt, right? I would suggest a good opportunity to renegotiate successfully on how we can spread that over and make it a much fairer point. Just also remember that, 15, 20 years ago, much of the lending in the international arena was bilateral, right? Chinese government would lend to Sri Lanka. At the moment, that's about 8-9%. Indian or the UK government gave money to Sri Lanka to develop the Victoria Dam system. And this lending is concessional. It's targeted to support development, right? As compared to private institutions coming in like BlackRock and whatnot, coming in and lending. It's predatory, essentially. And here is the problem. In the last 15, 20 years, Sri Lanka went from bilateral sources of foreign funding to private. And we had a government that was inherently corrupt at the core, taking all this money from private international lenders and not using it to the benefit of the people here, right? So we have to question why the IMF is punishing Sri Lankan people by demanding so many conditions on debt repayment. It should be much fairer. And let's keep it in context. We're talking about, $3 billion in US dollars is peanuts for them. They put 10 times more into the Ukraine conflict, for example, right? So it's all about leveraging power and control over the developing world. Unfortunately, Sri Lanka is still in that category. But I would say renegotiate the terms.
Thank you so much. Unfortunately, our time is up. And thank you so much, Mr. Roshan, for taking time out of your busy day to come here and sit and chat with us. And hope people will watch this and understand the situation that's going throughout the country as well as all the world. So thank you so much. We have a little bit.
Yeah, and also it was really interesting, the conversation with you, Mr. Roshan Madawela. The facts and everything that you said was really interesting. And I think during the Middle East crisis, and also it was really interesting that you brought in facts that would really matter to Sri Lanka as well, like the way you connected, how it was like the international and the domestic way, the trigger, the way you meant it. It was really interesting, and I hope everyone in Sri Lanka would definitely understand the connection, what's happening around. So yes, thank you so much for taking your busy schedule. And thank you for cooperating with the Daily Mirror and also with the podcast from RIUNIT and Daily Mirror. Thank you so much.
Big thank you to you, Oneli and Malit and Daily Mirror. And please do continue to do your excellent work, educating the people. Thank you. And thank you for having me. Cheers.